Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, September the 25th, and this morning it feels like we're all about to step into Andy Burnham world for a few days on our way to Liverpool. Why would you stop off at Alton Towers instead? My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Labour gathers in Liverpool for quite the conference in just over 48 hours, but the King of the North has decided to make his play, and Andy Burnham has told the world that Labour MPs are urging him to stand against the Prime Minister. What can Keir Starmer do to defend himself? That's our top story today. It will dominate the start of conference, of course. And by the way, we intend to be pretty prominent too, so you'll be getting a special bonus edition on Sunday to kick off the conference. That'll be just after lunch. Everything you need to know for the full day of Labour conference, first full one ahead in about 20 minutes. So see you then. You can have your Sunday late lunch and listen to it.
And just a quick example of why you need to listen. You get stuff here first. Yesterday, we were the ones that told you that Jaguar Land Rover's closure was the biggest political story of the moment. Good to hear other media outlets catch up with that this morning. We told you that the Prime Minister would be followed around by his commitment to back JLR to the hilt. Of course, it was shut down by a cyber attack, and now ministers are having to look at, well, one solution, apparently, Anne, is buying car components in order to keep the supply chain alive, which is a pretty novel role for any government. Spanner for Peter Kyle?
Right, so buying car parts to keep the car production going, it does rather boggle the mind, shows that that one is a real challenge there for Peter Kyle. Now, let's turn to the Burnham saga, and he is pointing out in an interview with The Telegraph that it's not him, Gov, it's MPs urging him to challenge for the Labour Party leadership. Mayor of Greater Manchester declining to rule out doing just that even before May's local elections. That's pretty punchy when you consider how badly Labour is expected to fare in Wales and Scotland. So ramping up the pressure, Sam, even before we get to the Ides of May. Burnham was setting out a pretty broad manifesto of policies he said would turn the country around. Did you notice the implication there that it wasn't being turned around by the present management? And the list would include higher council tax on expensive homes in London and the southeast. Speaks someone from Manchester. £40 billion of borrowing to build more council houses, income tax cuts for lower earners, and a 50p rate, our old friend, the 50p rate for the highest paid. It's a rich, soft left buffet. Oh, Andy.
Since the last time you and I gathered 24 hours ago, Anne, actually, turns out that the Telegraph interview was his second interview that's dropped. In a glorious long read by the New Statesman editor-in-chief, Tom McTague, Andy Burnham there tries to set out the terms of debate for the conference in Liverpool. He says, the issue for the conference is, where is our plan to turn the country around? So again, as you were just saying, he is making it clear he doesn't think the existing plan from Keir Starmer is anything like good enough. Isn't it amazing? Normally you have leadership jousts in code, but we've completely dispensed with any pretense. What's so interesting about what Andy Burnham's doing is he's being absolutely explicit. He's coming for Keir. He's even turning up with a credo, because some might say Keir Starmer doesn't have one. He might say Keir Starmer doesn't have one. But Andy Burnham has Manchesterism, which he says is a form of business-friendly socialism. So we'll talk about whether that exists at conference, I'm sure. We'll get into a bit of the detail of Andy Burnham in a moment, but I'm just sitting here wondering, how on earth does Keir Starmer match that now?
First, I have to get a Smiths reference in there. So I left the north, I travelled south, and I can't help the way I feel. Just rather sum up. You could kind of see Andy Burnham on the coach with those brooding big glasses staring out the window. I promise you that is going to happen. Anyway, Keir is fighting back. You'd expect that. I think that is anyway. He wants to get his ducks in a row before conference, but the context has changed and there will be a series of busy announcements. So today, the Prime Minister will be talking with regional TV journalists to set out how deprived communities can get around 2 million a year for the next decade. So there's a pot which is about 3.4 billion, as I understand it, and 330 regions. So that's 20 million over the decade. And that's intended to be used really to bring back to life communities who feel they're ignored, they're off the grid. Branch line Britain, new neighbourhood boards would get the powers to really zhuzh up their high streets, convert derelict pubs and shops, community run assets to support that, clamping down on that rather dispiriting spread of vape shops and perhaps an oversupply of barber shops, planning to clamp down on businesses not deemed to be in the community interest. Well, that sounds like it's answering a demand and some unhappiness, but it's quite complicated.
Yeah, whatever you do, just don't call it levelling up. The argument from government about why it's not levelling up is they say that levelling up under the Tories involved projects dictated from Whitehall, whereas this is devolving power. So we'll see whether or not communities end up agreeing with that and whether or not it works, because it does sound like there are quite a few hurdles, as you say. But interestingly, Anne, this plan was described to me last night as Morganism, as in the product of Morgan McSweeney. And that is essentially politics being something that voters experience when they walk out of their front door, and that government needs to recognise that people are losing pride in their locality. And so this is government doing something about that. But Morganism, that's named after the aide. It wasn't described to me as Starmerism, named after the man at the top who will sit in the chair doing the interviews to sell this policy. I just thought that told you something as well about where we are.
Oh, for sure, it tells you something about that dynamic. Bits of this remind me, Sam, of social democrat policies I've seen in parts of the continent, as in the European one, to restore respect. That word that's sort of often lingering here, or lack of respect that people feel in communities who feel they've been left behind. And as you point out, I nearly did use the levelling up comparison, but I think you are right to point out that it has a different dynamic, which is a more devolved approach. It will give you pots of money. You decide in some community focused way what you think it should be spent on. That fits with the sense of dominance to the capital, doesn't it, that Andy Burnham is providing. And his Greater Manchester base means that is to be taken seriously. It is a big population centre. His ambition is not in any doubt. He has a big following, at least whether people like him or not, a big footprint in Manchester and across the Greater Manchester area. So you come to the what might not work out so well. Well, he hasn't prospered in leadership races, whether he was competing against Jeremy Corbyn or trying to edge himself to the forefront of the Blair Brown years. It's just never quite worked out. It's not to say it won't, but he does seem to sort of stumble once he gets into a national politics race. What he's been trying to do in Greater Manchester in healthcare perhaps gives us a bit of a clue about the journey, as he would put it, that he'd been on. And that's a big model of cooperation between health trusts across these large populations. He has put together an impressive board of people who help with that. And I think that's intended to be the model. If you give more power to the regions, aka me, and people who share my view of where the country should be going, will get different results than relying on this Westminster bubble of, I don't know, previous top lawyers or something. It does go back a bit, I think, to his roots. We often say soft left now. To be honest, I just read Gordon Brown, Gordon Brown, Gordon Brown. That was the era when I think he thought that policy was going in the right direction. And he thinks that that's come off track in this era of, as he would put it, marketisation and privatisation. Big boo words often heard from Andy Burnham.
Yeah, I think it's a direction, and a very clear direction, which is a thing that's slightly sort of worrying people, because that's the worry about Keir Starmer. Is there enough of a direction shown by him? Cabinet ministers saying to me, the Prime Minister just not displaying a vision for where he wants to go. That is the thing that Andy Burnham is answering today. I've been talking to quite a lot of people at the top of the Labour Party, and they really are on edge about this. Keir Starmer's been holed up in Labour HQ all week, writing his speech, practicing his speech. He's got a sort of band of closest advisors, some long marchers, some of the new people he appointed in the room over at Labour HQ. But they know that the king over the water is a massive challenge. There was a flurry last night, by the way, because it was suggested to me that Andy Burnham was about to pull out of all his fringes, which prompted Labour aides to say, "Oh my God, he's running." But I checked; his person says he's still doing them. Right, there is one massive thing that I want to highlight in what Andy Burnham's talking about. It's very on brand for this podcast, and it's an important issue because in the Tom McTague interview in the New Statesman, Andy Burnham says we've got to get beyond this thing of being in hock to the bond markets. It's quite the statement. The implications of him saying that are huge, absolutely huge. So there is Andy Burnham appearing to challenge the idea that the bond markets are a threat, barely 3 years after they basically helped topple Liz Truss. This is also an implication that he basically thinks you can borrow a lot more. And that is a direct challenge to Rachel Reeves. And by implication, he's sort of saying, I don't believe in her fiscal rules. And also by implication, he's saying, I don't believe in the £30 billion black hole which her fiscal rules create. And many people in government think is the government's biggest challenge this autumn. So he simply wishes away the black hole. He wishes away the fiscal rules. He doesn't think that the bond markets are they need to credibly worry about it policing the behaviour of this government, the borrowing levels of government. I actually think it's a really clever argument in some senses because quietly many Labour MPs and members would side with Andy Burnham over Rachel Reeves. And I think that Rachel Reeves suffers because she never really won the argument. She never really made the argument about why her fiscal rules are necessary beyond a line here or there, and then endlessly repeating that she wasn't going to back down. And Keir Starmer has never really passionately made the case for them either. He's done that one. You don't win arguments that you don't make. So the principal internal opponent is coming for Keir Starmer over a massive argument that I don't think he won internally. This feels like danger.
It does. It does feel like danger for a couple of reasons you've laid out, and maybe one or two that I would add. I mean, it is, as you say, quite a seductive argument for parts of the Labour Party. Thought it was just something they said in the election campaign to show fiscal discipline, this tight corset around the Labour innards. But then you're in power and you go, hey, we can breathe out now. We can do the stuff we really want to do. And they were disappointed to find that they were still on the skinny diet. They were still on the 700 calories a day fiscal diet that Rachel Reeves clearly believes is there. And then she believes it's there to steady the economy, to keep the bond markets okay with the UK, to avoid dramas, runs on the pound, capital flight, and all of those nasty things. You certainly do have a lot of people on the left saying, is this really true? Could we not get by? These are very difficult times. Why don't we just sort of max out the borrowing? The problem with that is that we do have borrowing at 96% of public service debt to GDP. That is really the counter question here. Because if you are, so Germany is freaking out because they've decided to go on a borrowing splurge and they managed to get to the low 60s. It is not as common, other than in the south of Europe too, and France, which is is also in great trouble because it's got well over 100%. So there is really a downside to this that I think Andy Burnham has to answer. But where I think you are right politically, to bring it back to this podcast A game, supposedly, is what happens if people don't believe that? What happens if what I'm saying does not resonate with Labour MPs and those who would say, well, this is a dire situation. We'll sort out the other stuff when we come to it, and we'd ride out any problem in the bond markets. I mean, there have been difficulties in doing that. Ask Liz Truss if someone's got her number who could probably give her a ring from Labour.
Here's the thing, Anne. We don't totally know what Andy Burnham means by that phrase that I quoted. So I thought I'd go to his spokesman to see if there was any sort of clarity and to find out what making sure we're not in hock to the bond markets actually means in practice. And I was told by Andy Burnham's person that's as far as he's going at the moment. He's not doing any interviews or speeches about this. More detail will come at the appropriate time. At the moment, we're talking first principles. And I kind of thought, wow.
Okay.
Like very, very explicitly last night, I'm being told there's much more to come. We're only on the first principles stage. So that's how open they're being. So With the knowledge that there is a huge amount of runway left to travel, what do you think Starmer does?
Really interesting, that answer, isn't it? It sounds like sign up for a 2-year degree in Andy Burnham studies. First we do first principles, then we do 101, then we do Andynomics. Andynomics, I really want to do that one. But I think it's a good framing of a question that's been in my mind. What does Andy Burnham really want? I don't think he can intend really, maybe he does intend or hope, but you can't just kick out Keir Starmer and become Prime Minister without there being massive electoral damage. That would not solve the problem that you want to solve by saying, I'm better than Keir Starmer. So what does he really want? Does he want to, it's so interesting, you got that line about first principles from someone speaking for him or alongside him, does it mean we want to sort of really sweat this out? We're going to start this argument, and that puts us in a position where either Starmer has to kind of treat with Andy Burnham, give him more power. What does that mean? Does that mean they could maybe create a role for him alongside his Greater Manchester one? I think that's possible. That a lot of people have played that game in politics of making themselves so inconvenient. You have to give them a bigger job. The other idea is he just keeps making life difficult, and through the next May elections. But by the time he challenges, it's very clear what his alternative is because he's had time to lay it out. The only thing I would think at some point, the bond markets are not entirely deaf or blind. They do tend to notice this kind of thing. And so he can become part of the problem that he's trying to solve, of making the UK look less stable. We saw what happened in the markets when it looked like Rachel Reeves might go, not because they were after that awful crying in the Commons day. It was actually the markets said, like, she may not be perfect, but we'd rather have her than someone to the left of her. If that someone's Andy Burnham, maybe he can't outrun the bond market.
You ask, what can they do? I think it's interesting that there isn't at the moment any obvious practical route for him to hop and becoming an MP. Andrew Gwynn, who was potentially going to retire, has said that he's not going to step down as an MP, so that isn't a route. One question being asked last night, is there a way that if Lucy Powell wins the deputy leadership, which is looking increasingly likely, and then goes and sits on the national executive, could she swing things for Andy? But I checked in and I'm told that that wouldn't make a decisive difference to the voting numbers. It wouldn't really make a dent. The deputy leader has very little influence, and there is a kind of comfortable majority, 2-1 majority for Keir on the NEC. When I was going around people last night on the Keir side, they weren't really engaging intellectually with what Andy Burnham was saying. Instead, they were just taking the piss. So one person responded like this: a Blairite, a Brownite, a Starmerite, and a Corbynite went to the pub. The barman said, "What do you want, Andy?"
It's all in the delivery, Sam, and you nailed it.
Right, let's change subject very quickly. There's something else you want to talk about?
Yes, I thought it was worth reflecting a bit about what the government does want to talk about at conference. Our Dan Bloom saying in the playbook, Keir Starmer is planning to announce a digital ID scheme in the next couple of days. And that's been swirling around for some time. But if it is a centerpiece in his big speech, we can expect that to be, it's a bit technocratic. It's a subject we've all covered inside out over many years. I'm sure you too, Sam. But this sounds like it is linked to this, do you have the right to be here, sort of Labour branded patriotism, the ID card in every sense as being about not just access to services, but your identity, your entitlements. And it's not hard to hear the echoes of that in the way that he would link it to the asylum and immigration debate. It'd be really interesting how far he goes on that one. ID card's not always popular, even across the centre of Labour, no?
That's right. You're talking of echoes. You can hear the echoes of breakfast being made in the background. We can rule that out. That's not part of our plans. That's what Johnny Reynolds said about digital ID just a year ago. It's not in our manifesto. That's not our approach. That's what Yvette Cooper said. I tell you that not because governments don't change your mind, but just when this government denies things, quite a lot of the time, the denials turn out to be wrong. It's one of my problems as a journalist is you can't take denials at face value. On that slightly negative note, but hey, it's not exactly been all positive for Keir Starmer in this podcast. Should we bring it to a close? You've got so much of us to come in the coming days. Sunday lunchtime, episodes all week. After Keir Starmer's speech on Tuesday, we will be there for an extra episode as well. I can't wait to spend the time with you in the Politico pub over the weekend in Liverpool. Come and drop in to the Politico pub or the Sky Stand if you're in Liverpool. We are there to be badgered, harangued, questioned, and generally provide some company. So I look forward to seeing you and everyone else in Liverpool. Can't wait.
I will be in the pub. I'm sure my job is going to include having to pour pints for backbenchers, but I'm skilling up.